Hey y'all, welcome to Parent Empowerment with Mandy Drogin. I'm Mandy. I'm just a mom sitting down having real conversations with real Texas parents about what's going on in our schools. Today, we're joined by Mary Lynn Pruneda. Mary Lynn is a mother of 3. She is due to give birth to her 3rd son in about a couple weeks now. And she is also the Senior Policy Advisor at Texas 2036. Mary Lynn, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Mandy. I'm so glad to be here.
I'm so honored you're here because I'm pretty sure every time that I'm this close to giving birth, I want to see no one. So thank you for joining us. And thank you for being here to talk about your expertise both in public education, special education, and public education funding. One of the things that I often come to you with questions about just to make sure that we understand what's really going on is accountability and what parents need to know on how they can help their kids, particularly as it relates to accountability and making sure that they're reaching the standards that they need to reach.
Yeah, that's a great question. Probably one of the most important questions that we ask as parents of kids in school. So one of the things that I think a lot of people need to understand is that over 90% of Texas parents believe that their child is on grade level. That is not what the data says. The data says that somewhere less than 50% of our students are actually meeting grade level expectations in public school classrooms. So what's going on? What's the tension here? The biggest problem is that we've got an issue with grade inflation in schools. So about 90% of the time that a kid is in a classroom, the data tells us that they're on task. About 70% of the time, that child is meeting the expectation that the teacher had for that assignment. 50% of those kids are getting A's and B's. Do you want to guess how much of our curriculum is actually on grade level? It's less than 20%. And so if you've got a child in 2nd grade that every single day of their 2nd grade year is being given kindergarten or 1st grade work, they're bringing home A's and B's and they're feeling great about themselves, then all of a sudden they get to 3rd grade and they start taking the STAAR test. And the STAAR test comes back and says, your child is not reading, doing math, science, and history on grade level. So what are you inclined to believe? Kind of your history of report cards or this one test that happened on one day? Well, it turns out the problem and a lot of the frustrations with the STAAR is that the STAAR is the first thing that's telling parents the truth about their child's performance. And so instead, we're kind of trained and fed this diet of the STAAR exam isn't valid. The STAAR exam isn't reliable. It can't be trusted. That's not the case. It's actually the first time that we've gotten valid and reliable data on our students' performance. And unfortunately, we just can't look to grades as much as we used to.
Thank you for talking about that. We hear this all the time from parents that they do recognize that my kid seems to be behind, and yet they're getting these A's and B's. And teachers, I had a teacher from a southern area of Texas who, he was in high school, and he was brought in after being an accountant, or a CPA, I should say, for years. And he had an experience where the administrators were going in and changing the grades. He was doing algebra, courses that you need to graduate. And he literally sent me screenshots saying, I decided I couldn't do it anymore. He said, and I'm ready to talk about what happens is that they, not only do they instruct you not to give grades below a 50, and I've heard this from parents in other districts, that you can have as many chances as you want to make up classes. You can't be given a grade under this. Even a lot of teachers that are kind of waving the red flag on the fact that student athletes, particularly those ones that need to play under the Friday night lights, that they're oftentimes their grades are being changed. And it really is a huge problem that parents don't necessarily realize until Johnny or Sally get into college and they're stuck with thousands of dollars in remediation bills, right?
Yeah, exactly. Too many students in Texas need remediation when it comes to entering higher education. I think particularly we see a lot of remediation need for those that go into 2 years, but we can't forget the fact that even students that go into universities in Texas still need remediation at a rate of about 15%. That's too high if you're going into a 4-year university. And so I think we have to just kind of ask ourselves, when it comes to grading and when it comes to assessment, like whose needs are we putting first? Is it the need of the child, or is it the need of the system? And I personally think that we should always put the needs of the child first.
So agreed. And that's what the parent empowerment movement is all about. First is transparency. That's the first pillar. And second is a high quality education. You said it. I say it when I'm out. The commissioner of the Texas Education Agency, he said the quiet part out loud. 19% of the curriculum is on grade level. And it's completely unacceptable for Texans. Look, the Texas miracle that is driving the nation, we are the 8th largest economy in the entire world. We can't do this if we lower expectations for our kids. So what is the impetus for this grade inflation that we're seeing across the K through 12 system?
So I don't have like an official answer that I can 100% ascribe, 5 dozen scientifically valid studies to, but I can tell you this. I think a lot of times in public education, we have this very lovely and very wonderful instinct of meeting students where they are. And I think that that's amazing. And I think that we should meet kids where they are. But I also think that kids are a lot more capable than we give them credit for. Yeah. So one of the things that study that I mentioned about grade inflation found that if you gave a child that was not performing on grade level instruction, within 7 months, the achievement gap was closed. It doesn't matter where they come from. It doesn't matter the color of their skin. It's about rigorous and systematic instruction for our students that believes that they can do great things. It's great to want to support them where they are, but it's even better to push them to be their highest selves.
I love that. And because I 100% agree. I remember watching the movie Stand Together, where if anyone's unfamiliar with it, it's about a high school teacher that goes into an economically disadvantaged high school, and he raises that bar. And these kids, every single one of them in the class, end up going off to higher education. These are kids that are in the inner city that so many people have written off, that are behind. They've been socially promoted. And he said they can do it. If we give them the information and we set the bar high, they can do it. And I know that that's what everybody, the leadership, the governor, the lieutenant governor, the legislative leaders are saying. We can set the bar really high in Texas. And these kids, our kids, the next generation of Texas, can meet that and exceed that if we give them the information that they need to do it. Yeah. Well, thank you for kind of talking about what we are seeing and what's going on. And what a parent can do is start questioning that, which kind of leads me into when we talk about the STAAR exam. I remember you shared how many times that it's been tested, the STAAR exam, to make sure that we are truly measuring what children have learned and where they are. There's a whole lot of messaging that the STAAR exam is bad. And there's a whole lot of messaging that, quite frankly, we shouldn't be taking any sort of assessments, right? Don't assess your kids, even though by any scientific standard, we can show that when we figure out where a child is and then provide them with a high quality education, they can meet that bar. So why is there so much negative messaging coming out about this is bad, get rid of an assessment, regardless if it's the STAAR or really any assessment?
Oh gosh, that's such a hard one. I think it's a lot of things. So I think it's because the STAAR tells us a different story than a lot of what grades tell us, and parents have a lot of data on grades, and they only get the STAAR test once. And it's really easy to just kind of write off the STAARs, just something that's imposed by your Texas Education Agency overlords onto your child that just can't possibly measure how wonderful and special each individual child is. That is true. It can't measure how wonderful and special each individual child is, right, but it can, to a scientific level of accuracy, determine whether or not your kid can read and whether or not your kid can do math. And then as parents, we can take that information and we can do really good things for our kids in partnership with our teacher. Because I think one of the reasons that I'm so passionate just about having assessment data is so that parents can make the best decision for their child, because no one loves their kid more than their parents. That's what some of you say all the time. And I believe that for my children. And I want my children to be regularly assessed. And I'm probably going to be one of those weird moms giving them extra assessments when they get home, because I'm so passionate about the fact that I think better data makes us better parents. And when we spend so much of our time and our talent and our treasure attacking the source of this data, instead of asking ourselves, hey, is it okay with us as Texans that only 50% of kids can read and do math on grade level? And then let's fix that problem. And instead of just spending so much time litigating and attacking both the STAAR and the way that we kind of grade our public schools, it's just a very frustrating cycle that we seem to all be trapped in.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. You talk about that litigation. In fact, just recently, yet again, litigation holding back the A through F system. Can you tell parents about when and why the A through F system was put into place, the point of it, and why we've really only seen one grading of the A through F system because the entire system keeps suing to stop parents and taxpayers, quite frankly, from being able to see just how well children in their districts and in their individual schools are doing.
Yeah, so I'll tell you in a story form. So in 2017, Texas said, hey, the system that we have is not good for kids. It was basically to putting 97, 95% of districts in Met standard. And the rest of the districts, we called them improvement required, even though they were chronically failing their kids. But we tried to find a nice way to describe it. Right. And so the legislature came back and through an overwhelming consensus, came in and said, hey, we're going to adopt a new public school accountability system. And then they came back and they fixed it again. And they made it even better the second time. It's called the A through F accountability system. We put it in place for 1 year in the 2018-2019 school year. And we, for the first time, rated 100% of campuses and 100% of districts under this new system. Parents knew if their school was an A, a B, a C, and they could do something about it. Then COVID happened. And we put in place some pandemic pauses, and I certainly understand why we needed to do that. The world turned upside down, and we had to respond. We had to be flexible. However, what's happened since COVID is that we've seen just the A through F accountability system trapped in this cycle of litigation. And one of the biggest charges levied against the system is that it was updating the rigor of some of the indicators before it should have. But this is the problem, Mandy, is that part of the agreement and part of the structural design of the A through F system was that we were going to update the rigor every 5 years. Under the old system, and this should be ridiculous to all of us.
Because 19% of the curriculum was on grade level. Let's keep hitting that home. We were not providing rigorous curriculum and standards in our system.
Yeah.
Okay, I just want to make sure that people understand the point is we're trying to get every single child, regardless of their income, their zip code, or any other factor. The second pillar of the parent empowerment movement is every single child in Texas deserves access to a high quality education. So I wanted to reinforce that. The purpose was not to be punitive in any way, but it was to raise that bar and to get the curriculum up to a rigorous standard that every Texas child deserves.
Yeah, absolutely. And to make sure that we were all monitoring whether or not things were working. That's part of the benefit of A through F is we can put in place policies and we can see whether or not more kids are reading and doing math on grade level and graduating ready for college and career. But anyways, under the old A through F system, to get an A as a school district under your college, career, and military readiness metric, only about 60% of your kids had to actually be graduating college and career ready. As a parent, do you actually believe that a high school should be an A if only 60% of kids are ready to be adults when they graduate?
Well,
yeah.
Okay, when I was growing up, I'm pretty sure that a 60 was an F.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Right? When we were all growing up, parents, y'all, when we were growing up, a 60 on anything was an F. It was an F.
Yeah.
But on our standards, we were saying if 60% of the kids met it, we were giving them an A.
Yes. And so the state came along and said, hey, y'all, we should update this. We should make it reflect roughly what parents saying. And even then, we still didn't update it to a 90%. It was an 88% was what was proposed. And that triggered a lot of lawsuits. And so it's this frustrating tension between, we're trying to give people time to adapt to these new accountability systems and trying to make accountability the very best that we can through a robust public information process and talking to districts and working with TEA. But it just continues to be sued on these things that I think ordinary people will be, I'm sorry, can you please say that to me again, that an 88% is the goal that we're trying to shoot for to get an A? So.
Yeah, well, and that goes to the number one, the top pillar in the parent empowerment movement is transparency.
Yeah.
Every single parent deserves to know what their child is learning and why they're learning it. Every single parent deserves to have their student have access to curriculum that baseline is on grade level. Yeah. Right? And to hide that, to try and tell parents, I can remember realizing I was watching a House Pub Ed meeting and they kept, when I say they, it was superintendents and kind of the alphabet soup crew, right? Those that come from all these associations, union linked, things like that. And they kept saying, using these numbers, claiming that, well, and it was well over 50% of their districts, well, 70% of kids are on grade level. And I go back and they're including the approaches grade level. And they don't disclose, not to the committee and not to the public, that if you literally look at the definition of approaching grade level, it requires that there is someone from the school system stepping in to actually do tutoring or therapy. There is an intervention. It literally says there must be an active intervention. And I just thought, why can we not talk about this? This culture of silence, talking about things doesn't mean we're attacking it. It means we are trying to solve a problem.
And we want to make it better.
Right.
The STAAR exam is not perfect. The accountability system is not perfect. But if we spend so much of our time just trying to tear them down instead of trying to build them up and create the best system, the most child-forward system that we can in the country, then we're never going to get there. Yeah. And we're just going to end up in this place where parents have no information on how their kids are doing. And that's not the scenario that we need to be in as Texans.
And then they're shocked. I can't tell you how many grandparents are a part of the parent empowerment movement because they saw what happened when their child was not prepared to launch and be successful. And they're fighting for their grandkids and they're fighting for that next generation because when you recognize, whoa, I didn't know this. I put trust in a system. It's not bad people, right? It's a bad system.
Absolutely not. Yeah.
It's not bad people who don't want what's best. But the way that we have created a system that does not want to address the fact that roughly 32% of kids are 6 months after graduation not in workforce. They're not in higher education, including career or technical college, and they're not in the military. And so many of those young people that are failing to launch after they've been promoted are young boys. And I know you and I talk about this a lot because I have a son. You are a mother of 3 little boys. Can we talk a little bit about what we're seeing in this, the social promotion and, quite frankly, the failure to launch for this generation?
Yeah, I think it's probably one of the most important public policy issues of our time in education that's getting the least amount of attention is the problem of young men. And what are we doing to create a system that supports our boys? I think there's a lot of really good ideas out there. One of the ones that I know I'm personally a fan of, and I think you're a fan of as well, is thinking about retaining young men and keeping them back and letting them go into kindergarten as six-year-olds. I think there's a lot of really good data that shows that that's ultimately the best outcome. That's what I'm doing for my kids, all of them. If you're a boy, we're going to probably hold you back.
Mary Lynn, tell me something about the A through F system that most parents don't know.
Well, my favorite part about the A through F system, Mandy, is this concept of what we call relative performance, which is kind of a jargony way to say, is your school better than a school at a similar level of affluency? So let me tell you a story of my public school.
That means money, right?
Yes,
like if
money.
we're talking, is your school better? If we're because we know that kids from lower socioeconomic backgrounds oftentimes need a little bit more help and assistance. So that's what we're talking about.
Yeah. And I think sometimes, we live in this kind of cocoon of our suburban enclave. And we just presume that because, my house is worth over $500,000 that my public school is going to be a good one. And so that's the story of what happened to me and my husband. So me and my husband moved into this neighborhood in Austin, and it's very lovely. It's a golf course community. It's got wonderful sidewalks and wonderful parks. But being the education person that I am, I'm very interested in their performance. Sure. And I would like to know whether or not they're better than schools in similar levels of income, because that actually is going to tell us whether or not we have a great public school. It's not, are they performing better than everyone else? It's, are they performing better than schools that are similarly situated? My school is a 69. Oof. My school is failing relative to those other schools. And so that can help me have good conversations with my school board members. It can inform me and my husband, are we going to take my kids to a charter school? Are we going to find some kind of alternate arrangement for them? Because a 69 is not a place that I want my kids to go.
Right. I don't think that's a place that anyone wants their kids to go, right?
Absolutely
Every
not.
parent, regardless of their income, if they're living in a $500,000, a $5 million house, or they're in, renting and doing their best to pay the rent and put food on the table. every single parent has that love for their child, and they want their child to have access to a great education.
Yeah.
Go ahead. So y'all saw this. You saw that your school in Austin, 69.
69. And I think that's the story of a lot of more affluent districts. And that's the value of A through F. And that's the tragedy of the fact that we don't have access to this information because it's trapped in this cycle of litigation. Because there is no other way under the sun that we can possibly know that type of information on school performance other than this accountability system. And that's why I'm so passionate about it, because it's about getting the best information into the hands of the people that are making decisions on behalf of their children.
Right. And then figuring out why. Yeah. Why is it a 69? What are we not doing? Are you one of the 30 to 40% of school districts that still are not teaching phonics to teach kids how to read? Are you one of the districts that maybe your administrator is focused on some of these culture wars and social activism as opposed to just reading, writing, history, civics, science? Like, let's do what parents really want, and that's prepare our children with the education they need to launch. I think that's a really, really great point, and something that parents need to know. They need to understand, again, this isn't an attack on a system. It's about, okay, where is a problem and how do we fix it? But if we don't have the transparency to know what's going on and how we are relative, how are we really, truly performing, not just those report cards that, as we've talked about, are oftentimes not the best judgment of what's going on in the classrooms. Thanks for pointing that out. And I think it's also really important for parents to know that as they're wanting to see the accountability, wanting to make sure that their child is being assessed. I get parents and grandparents that come and talk to me all the time whose children have gone through the system, and they're part of the parent empowerment movement because they realize that they weren't truly shown the information. There was not the transparency into what their child was learning and why. And then their child that maybe was an A or B student ends up failing to launch, ends up unable to succeed in college, or ends up having to take massive amounts of remedial courses. And it's really a huge problem that we're seeing when, according to the TPER data, that about 32% of our kids that are graduating out of our public school system that they are failing to launch, meaning they're not in the military, they're not in a career, and they're not in higher ed or in a career in technical training program. What is happening particularly to our young boys? I know this is something you and I are passionate about, having a son myself and you having your third boy on the way. We have a real crisis for our young men. So can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I think that the information about young male performance is one of the most concerning public policy trends in public education that so few of us are paying attention to. I think there's been a big national movement to start paying attention to it. I think as Texans, we need to start owning this more. In particularly because the data for young men is almost always worse for our Black and Hispanic young men. And as you know, by 2036, our state is going to be over half Hispanic children in our public school system. So that's a huge amount of Texans that we have got to come up with a better solution for. So if you think about higher education, some data says that about 66% of females are kind of enrolling in college directly after high school, but only 57% of males. That gap it's getting wider. It's not getting smaller. Right. And so we have to ask ourselves this question, like, what is it that's not attracting young men to higher education? And then what are the things that we can put in place that maybe will be better for them? Yep. I think one of the things that I'm so passionate about is career and technical education and making sure that we can expand access just dramatically in our public schools, ultimately because it's about this problem of boys and figuring out how we can get them into these systems while they're still young and get them a certification in HVAC, or, I love the ones that the kids are getting certified in climbing the windmills and being a windmill technician, but because I'm from West Texas. There's just so many wonderful options. And I think if we double down on stuff like that, by 2036, by our state's bicentennial, we're going to be a lot better off.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I just had the opportunity to tour TSTC, a Texas
Oh, that's
State
great.
Technical College,
Yeah.
and I was blown away at all the different programs that they were offering. And what was so exciting to me is part of education savings accounts can be used to go to TSTC or to another community college that is offering these programs. We can really maximize the investment in our kids, even when they're in high school. These kids, particularly males, who they don't want to go into a four-year school. They don't want to pursue a humanities degree or a liberal arts degree. And that's okay. They want to work with their hands. They want to be outdoors. It was so exciting and encouraging to see that whether it's, like you said, HVAC. Look, the Workforce Commission tells us that we're going to be short nearly 5,000 HVAC workers by 2030. So we're coming up on 5 years from now. Look, in the heat of Texas, I don't want to have to wait weeks until my AC is replaced. And I know nobody else does either. Or plumbers, we're going to be short 7,000 plumbers. We're going to be short 10,000 electricians. All three of those industries, we've got young people who could graduate high school with a certificate or even an associate's degree to go launch and go work. And it's stuff that not only provides a high-paying job for them, but also their families. We're seeing, the decline of enrollment in schools. And I know as moms, there's nothing that brings me more joy in life than raising my 3 kiddos. And it's the most joyful and challenging job that I've ever run. But I just see that these careers are out there. The demand is out there. Look, these kids are coming out making lots and lots and lots of money. So that is something that I think more people are recognizing, that the 4-year college for all, it's not for all. We don't need to send kids into massive levels of debt, which is what a lot of them are doing, is taking on debt, particularly those that are not prepared if they've been just promoted. We send them to college and they don't finish. They've taken out this debt. They're frustrated. They too feel like the system was not set up to steer them towards what would fulfill them in life. Well, thanks for talking about that, because it is something that I am super passionate about, is making sure that particularly our young men, our sons, the next generation of Texas really do have access to the career and technical education that they want and that's out there. So something else that I want to talk about when we're talking about being able to use education savings accounts, but just funding in general, right? Something I know that you are one of, I'll say, probably 10 or 15 people in the whole state of Texas that actually fully understands the funding formula, because that thing is wild, trying to understand it. I've been doing advocacy for parents for over a decade, and I'll tell you what, it's pretty convoluted and confusing how things have been pieced together. But what I hear a lot is that in the past legislative session that concluded in 2023, the 88th legislative session, that there was no money given to public schools. And can you talk a little bit about the $6 billion, the additional $6 billion that was given? And looking at it in totality, our expenditures was about $16,792 per child. And I think when we really look at how much we're spending, there's a question of, does more money equal better results? And are we spending the $92.4 billion in the right places right now?
Yeah, that's a great question. Public school funding it can be such a frustrating and hard topic, because so many things can be true and yet they can sound contradictory. So a couple of true statements. We put in over $6 billion into the entire public education system last session. Part of that was for teacher health care. But I don't know of any other business that can run healthcare costs separate from their overall operating costs. So I consider that part of the expenditure on public education. Something else that's also true is that we are underfunding very dramatically our special education students. We have got to address the fact that we have like a $1.7 billion deficit when it comes to special ed, and we've got to fix that so that we can provide our most vulnerable students with what they need. Other things that are also true is that we have more teachers than we've ever had. And so that also, when you have more teachers but a limited set of money, that kind of forces teacher pay down. There's so many different complications in public school funding that can make it really frustrating to talk about. But generally speaking, we certainly have more money than we did in 2019. But one of my personal kind of policy preferences or policy statements that I always say when asked about public school funding is that I'm not one of those people that's going to say, we have enough pub ed spending. I'm not going to say, money doesn't matter in public education. I actually think money does matter, but I think it's money spent in the best possible way. And with every single dollar being put towards, okay, how is this money actually getting more kids reading and doing math on grade level? And then that secondary, but almost just as important question, how is it lifting up and supporting our teachers through paying them the very, very most that we possibly can?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I talk about all the time, I am a public school parent. I send my children now that I have my second in kindergarten, to a public charter school that I absolutely love and I'm so grateful for. And I can remember last year when for whatever crazy reason, the kind of establishment of those that have this fear of parents being able to make choices, quite frankly, turned down $7 billion additional dollars, which would have included $4,000 bumps to teachers or pay to teachers. And it was just this awful conversation that I was, trying to talk to those that were in my children's own school. And it was heartbreaking because I'm with you. I want to empower parents with ESAs and raise teacher pay. Make sure that those two factors, right? Parents, we know that a parent and the teacher in their classroom are the two most important factors in a child's success. And not ensuring that teachers are receiving the pay that will keep them going, not just the pay, but also the support in terms of discipline and whatnot, but making sure that they are taken care of instead of trying to steer money out of the classroom, quite frankly. I'm constantly blown away. I've seen this new thing. They're trying to do it here in Austin where let's build affordable teacher housing. And I'm like, no, let's make sure that we're paying teachers wages so they can purchase their own house, so that they can pursue their own dreams outside of the classroom, so that they feel respected as opposed to having what I would say the profiteers steer money to more profiteers. And that's, I could not be more with you in saying we've got to make sure that we are protecting our kids first and foremost and empowering parents and ensuring that our teachers know how grateful we are for the service that they are providing for not just our own families, but for Texas. Yeah. So thank you for talking about that. And thank you for talking, something that I want to highlight is your passion, particularly for special needs kids, those in our special education. And you and I were there last time I was pregnant. When we were advocating for the Supplemental Special Education Services Act to pass back, the governor, he created the program in his wisdom for the children that were not getting access to their special education services during the COVID shutdown. It was wildly popular amongst special education families who needed to be able to make that choice. And you and I were waddling around at 9 months pregnant, knocking on doors, standing up for all of these parents that really, really needed access to these grants, these $1,500 grants, which it's grown into this incredibly successful program. And so thank you for constantly just being an advocate for kids, particularly our most vulnerable kids. Thank you for talking to parents and explaining kind of what's going on and why you and I are advocates for assessments. I'm right there with you. In fact, I had a sister-in-law say, "Are your children going to take the STAAR?" And I said, "Yes, they are. I actually genuinely want to know."
Yeah, absolutely.
How are my kids doing? Because then we can solve a problem, right? Yeah. Well, thank you. I want you to look in that camera right there and tell the parents of Texas, the moms and dads who need to be empowered. You've given so much great information. Tell them what they can do for their kids and their schools.
Yeah. First thing I'll say is take seriously the results of your child's STAAR exam. Go online, use the information that the Texas Education Agency has provided you, and then figure out how your child is actually doing, and then work with them over the summer. You as a parent are their first and greatest teacher. You could do amazing things to improve the rate at which they're understanding reading, the rate at which they're understanding mathematics. Don't let anything tell you otherwise. The second thing that I'll do is I'll point you to this website called Learning Heroes. Learning Heroes allows you through mid-year check-ins to gauge your child's performance in reading and math. So you don't actually have to wait till the STAAR exam. You can use the resources that they have, which are really simple and really parent-focused, to make sure that you understand, well, maybe my kid's struggling with this specific aspect of phonics, and we can work on it, and Learning Heroes can kind of guide you through that process. But overall, you can do this. There's nothing that matters more than your engagement in your child's education. And with the right data and the right resources provided by the state, we can do the best things possible for all of our kids.
Mary Lynn, thank you for your advocacy for parents. Thank you for standing in the gap and really, truly shining a light on what's going on and why we should all be united in ensuring that transparency and quality is there for every single parent. So grateful for all of your work at Texas 2036. And I wish you the best of luck. Thanks for joining us. I know you're about to give birth any day now, but we truly appreciate all of your work. Thank you all for joining us. We will ensure that we include the links to Learning Heroes and all the other information that Mary Lynn has provided. Thank you for advocating for Texas parents. Thank you for joining us on Parent Empowerment with Mandy Drogin. And now you have the power.